Hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of Bones and Stones. It's great to be with you guys today after a short little hiatus that we had last week. And today we're very excited. We have a researcher from the Evolutionary Studies Institute at Wits University, Paloma de la Pena. And we thought we'd bring Paloma on today to talk about a very exciting announcement, which I'm sure some of you heard about last week, the recent science paper announcement about the exciting new discoveries at Border Cave. So Paloma, without further ado, maybe you could just take away, tell us a little bit about your involvement in the Border Cave project and what kind of archaeological work you've been involved in there. Obviously, this is a much larger collaborative project. So what has been your role in the Border Cave project?
So thank you for the invitation. So my role is basically, I'm the lithic specialist, the stone tool analyst, and I'm also involved in the field work, which I actually consider a specialization. So since 2015, Lucinda Bagwell and Francesco De Rico decided to resume excavations on Border Cave because, as you probably know, it's an amazing site, expanding basically the whole MSA and what it has been called in Africa early later Stone Age. And I think the idea of that project of Lucinda, of Francesco, and of Lynn Worley, that is also a co-director of the project, was to try to tackle the fine resolution stratigraphy that this site can provide. I mean, of course, in many sites you can, not in all of the sites you have the preservations that you have in Border Cave. And also you don't have the type of remains that you find in Border Cave. So I think that they wanted to do a fine-grained study of all the remains that this cave offers, which is an outstanding example of good organic and plant preservation. Besides that, it has human remains. Besides that, as I was saying, it has a long chronology. So I think the objective of that project was to tackle this sequence with new techniques, with new methodologies, with new questions after Beaumont's work. And yeah, my role is basically to study the lithics. And I think that my role is to help in the fieldwork, which is quite complex in a site like this one, because it's amazing, but it's very difficult to excavate.
Thanks, Paloma. Yeah, it really is an incredible site, and listening to the announcement last week made me realize just how incredible it is. When you were talking about all the different items that have been recovered at the site in terms of preservation and stuff like that. But could we maybe unpack the actual announcement of the science paper? So what was actually announced, and then what is the kind of broader significance of this fire use and grass bedding that was announced in the science paper?
Well, what it was published in the science paper was one of the oldest evidence in the world of grass bedding. And that has implications in the sense that people were, I don't know how to say in English, were ordering their space, were kind of organizing their domestic space. But not only that there was a grass mat, that it has been said that, many animals do grass mats to sleep, like chimpanzees and birds. And the implication is that we also found that this grass bed, that it is in a layer with a chronology of over 200,000 years before present. It was on top of a layer with ashes. And not only that there were like different episodes of this, which means, which indicates or might indicate that was not a coincidence, that people were establishing these ash layers and then the grass mat, probably to isolate the bed in order to protect themselves from the bites of insects and other parasites. Also, it means that they were probably cleaning the space. They were like burning and then racking those ashes in order to to order their space, their domestic place, in this case, the cave. And we do not know exactly what was the purpose of these grass mats, but we assume, we don't assume, we have identified debris or chips of stone tool making and also of iron oxide pieces, which means that probably it was also a work space. So we cannot say that they were grass mats to sleep, or if they were just to condition their space. When you are working in a cave, it's dusty, you don't want to get full of dust, you don't want to get dirty, and then you condition, I don't know if you say it like that in English, but you order your space and you adequate it for your task. And obviously, this is a really old chronology. This is over 200,000 years before present, which means that putatively the people that make this grass bedding was maybe first Homo sapiens. It could be other species, but we usually assume in Middle Stone Age that is old Homo sapiens. But this is really old chronology, so it has great implications, because it means that you are controlling fire, you are controlling the debris of the fire, you are adequating the space, and so on. And of course, the big debate on Middle Stone Age for many years has been on the cognition and the complexity of these first Homo sapiens. So it has implications in that regard.
Thanks, Paloma. Another very interesting thing that I noticed during the presentation was the type of plant remains that were being used as well in terms of the ash. They were using bushes that would have been, presumably had some kind of medicinal qualities that would, wasn't only the ash that would have, chased away the insects and pests and things like that to help maintain a clean site. It was the fact that they were using medicinal plants in order to...
like the camphor bush, there was charcoal of this species that still is used in Eastern Africa in order to repel insects. But also the point that we were making, I mean, it's an hypothesis. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily the case, but with the ash, you are isolating whatever you have on top of it. So the ash close the respiratory system of parasites, and that means that they are not going to bite you, they are not going to pass through it. And indeed, Lynn made some experiments in that regard with ticks, which is a quite risky experimental archaeology work, I think.
Paloma, it's really interesting because it seems like there's so many different layers, and excuse the pun, but so many different layers going on here in terms of the species of plant that's being used, the organization of space, cleaning out the space, and so on. And I mean, it's an incredible find. But a lot of this comes then down to the preservation of Border Cave. The fact that these deposits are in such good condition, and like you say, you get this fine-grained resolution of that site. So is Border Cave, are we getting to see this level of detail at Border Cave purely as a result of preservation? Or is it because this site is such an important site on the landscape to the occupant? So were there other sites like Border Cave that possibly had as intensive, as interesting occupations, but the preservation isn't good enough to see that? Or is Border Cave really a standout site?
I think it's a very good question. I think the site has an outstanding preservation, and that's why we found these remains, but I don't think it was an exception at the time. So it's not a weird site, which it has been said sometimes, thinking on the early later Stone Age and in the white ash, because it has an outstanding bone industry and other items. I think the site has an outstanding plant preservation, but this is something that happens in other sites in Southern Africa, and I've been lucky enough to see other sites with this outstanding preservation. Maybe not as good as Border, but you have Shibudu, where also it was published in Science, bedding with sedges with 77,000, I think. You have also, that I have seen, Bushman rock shelter with an outstanding preservation. That doesn't mean that it's all along this sequence, but you have very good preservation. In Eastern Cape, you have Strathaland that it was published, I think, by Opperman, and it had also grass mats, not as old as Border Cape, but you have plant remains. You have also the new Pondo Land project. The other day, Irene Esteban was giving a talk, and she was talking about good organic preservation. So there is something in Southern Africa of a good organic preservation. And I think people are beginning to keep an eye on this, because it opens or a spectrum of interpretation in the archaeological record that we usually have restricted to the lithics and to the bones, but it's more than stone and bones.
Yeah, sure. And then with the find, so Border Cave was obviously has been discussed for many years, but recently De Erica and colleagues and Pargita and colleagues entered a debate around the identification of San identities in Border Cave at about 44,000 years based on certain implements that were excavated. So if you're looking at these levels, I know it's much earlier, but this organization of space, do you think that it's possibly related also to gender roles within society and other kinds of social practices that were present at that time that led to the way that the space was arranged?
I don't understand the question, Tim. You mean that the space was how does it relate with the publication of the RICO? I don't understand.
Do you think the arrangement of space? Do you think it was linked to social practice? Like, do you think they were arranging space following gender roles within society and other social issues, social practices?
The arrangement of social practices through spatial analysis in the cave. I think that would be really interesting to tackle as a research question in archaeological excavation, but then you will have to do a different methodology of excavation to the one that we are doing. Because in these 5 years, we have been basically reviewing the stratigraphy published by Beaumont and going through the whole north profile of the big trench of Beaumont's excavation of the 70s, and excavating really slowly, trying to recover all these plant remains and all sorts of remains. Indeed, Border Cave is an excavation where you plot more plants than other remains, which is amazing, and wood. So to tackle your question, you would have to open in area, and that would be a different design of the methodology of the archaeological excavation. And this is something that we are not doing, and it will imply to do a big campaign, opening up a big space, because you would need to do that, I think, in a big campaign of quite long time to really begin to see those things. But ideally, that would be great, and maybe you could tackle the issues that you are mentioning. But not for now. We are excavating really slowly, trying to recover all this high resolution material, and it takes time and effort, and a small discovery tells you a lot, like it has been demonstrated with this grass bedding.
Okay, no, great, thanks.
It really is incredible. And Paloma, maybe just to get back to the lithics, obviously something that always excites Tim and I, the stone tools. And I asked a question during the presentation as well about what your thoughts were regarding the actual preserved assemblages. One thing that I didn't ask though is in terms of the formal tools, how do the formal tools fit in with regards to the other subsistence habits which are kind of documented kind of on the site in terms of bringing in grass matting, for example, or processing wood to some degree if they're going to be using medicinal plants and burning them and stuff. Do we see the production of formal tools which kind of talk to those subsistence habits? or subsistence activities on site?
I mean, ideally, that is what I would like to, what we would like to relate, you know, all these things. I think we are still in a very preliminary phase, and also the amount of the extent of the the area that we have excavated is really small, you know. Regarding the technology of those over 200,000 years old layer, it looks like preliminarily, Matt, is mainly a Levallois point reduction. And there is also blade production. But I'm talking in really general terms because I haven't studied in depth this technology. Also, our sample is very small. And also, I haven't had I wanted to go this year to Kimberley to look the whole collection of Beaumont to compare the technology, but I could not go. So what I can tell you is very preliminary. How does this technology relate with the other archaeological items and other material culture that we found on the site? It's very early to say. What I can tell you is that in the lithic analysis of this layer of the bedding over 200,000, the Kevin layer or dark brown Kevin, I found 3 refittings, and you know, it's a good, you could see that there was snapping on site. One of the things that is interesting in terms of the pattern of occupation of these sites is that the density of material in most of the layers is very low. So what it looks to me is that it's not a palimpsest, that there are many different occupations and they have been compressed. And what it looks to me is that in some parts of the stratigraphy, what it is reflecting is short occupations that have been very well preserved, but they were not really long. I don't know if it was 1 week, if it was 2 weeks, it was maybe 2 visits along 3 months. I have no idea. But it doesn't seem that there is a lot material, like for example at Sibudu or other sequences that I have studied of the Middle Stone Age in South Africa. Also, there is good preservation in some layers, and there are taphonomical problems in other layers. It's not a Pompeii effect all along the sequence. I don't know if I explained myself properly, but yeah.
No,
but regarding the lithics of these tallest layers, we are still, I think it's a Levallois production, maybe of points, of blades. And there are very few sequences that we can compare because we have very few sequences in Southern Africa with a chronology over 200,000. You have Florisbad, you have probably Glaciers, if I remember correctly. But there are not many places to compare. And also imagine to compare this with Glaciers is very far away. I mean, this is almost in Mozambique, and you know.
Thanks, Paloma. Just touching on the refits, because the refits are always obviously such a good indication of context. I mean, having pieces that fit together, and I think this was something that was spoken about in the paper as well, is, you know, provides a very good indication for there being on-site production activities as well, based obviously on the distribution of cores and flakes and stuff. But having those pieces together on site obviously suggests that the conditions for preservation, the retention of material, was obviously very good. But just touching on the resolution of the layers, you mentioned that some of the occupations could have been, you know, very short periods, maybe some a little bit longer. In terms of the 3D mapping of those actual artifacts and specifically the refitting pieces, do you think it's possible to identify specific areas on site where, you know, kind of napping was favored or where it took place? I know there was some talk, I think in the paper or during the presentation, where stone tools were actually found intermixed with the grass bedding. If I remember correctly, I may be wrong.
Yes,
so do you think that the grass bedding, I think you touched on it earlier, could potentially have just been some kind of padding on the ground as well, you know, for during napping, so not only for sleeping possibly?
Yeah, I mean, the grass bedding could be for different purposes. Only to, you know, you don't want to sit down in the ground of the cave, very dusty, very dirty. You know, maybe we could detect if we open in areas, I was telling to Tim, we could detect areas of napping, areas of different activities, maybe of other type of activities, well, butchering or making ornaments, who knows? But but in order to assess that and we would have to open in area, and I don't think maybe in a small part of the cave we could do it, but I don't think that with the current project we are going to have time to open up. But in the future, that would be an amazing project. To choose a high resolution layer, particularly the top layers, not only one white ash, that is the famous one of the early later Stone Age, but for example, 2BS and 3 white ash, I mean, they are amazing. So maybe you.
So then, Paloma, if we can just come a little bit nearer in time to where we are. Border Cave is also so well known for its earlier, later Stone Age assemblage. Have you worked much in the layers that date to that sort of period?
I haven't studied the material of the early, later Stone Age. I only did a preliminary analysis of the material of the lithics in 2018, that we had a paper in Journal of Field Archaeology describing the new project.
Okay.
And it basically coincides with the first description of Beaumont and with what Soriano and Villa and others have described. But of course the material that I have is very small sample, because we have excavated very little and very slowly. But the preservation of those layers it's outstanding.
Okay. I'm just interested because I know we spoke not too long ago to Desi Muyanga. Sorry, and he, him and one of our students at UP who's working with Desio, they're looking at Daimane Rock Shelter, which is just on the opposite side of Swaziland, basically. It's east from Border Cave, where there's a Middle Stone Age. They don't have chronology yet. It was excavated, when was it? Some time ago. I can't remember the exact dates. I think it was the early 90s. They've got Middle Stone Age, that then there's a short hiatus. And then after that is straight into the later Stone Age. So there seems to be an occupation gap, or something has been flushed out of the shelter. This is part of what they're going to be investigating at the site. And I just thought it's interesting from a landscape perspective, once they've done this work, and Deso gave us a nice chat on it as well, once they've done this work, to see how chronologically that occupation or that landscape ties in with the Border Cave occupation, and specifically around this period.
But I could not hear you at the beginning. Where is this site? In the other side of Swaziland?
In Mozambique.
Okay. Well, that would be very interesting to see how it matches. I mean, sites to compare with that old chronology, there are very few, as I was saying, but then you have occupations at Border Cave around 70,000. I think one RGBS has that chronology. Then you have 60,000 and 40,000. I mean, the post-HP, or what it has been called the post-Howison sport, is still very badly described. So it would be really interesting to see different occupations in this part of the continent.
Yeah, I think with that site, the trick is going to be to get decent chronology. They did date the site, but if I remember correctly, all the dates were from the deposits above this brief hiatus between the MSA and LSA layers. So it's going to be quite interesting to see, when they get good chronology out of the site, how it compares. And obviously from a technological point of view, what the MSA looks like, and then what the overlying LSA looks like. It's going to be an interesting study.
Yes, very interesting. I didn't hear the first part of the question, Tim, I must confess you. So
No,
I don't know.
No, I was just saying that it's going to be a fascinating study, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, great, Paloma. I think we'll call it there. I think we're going to get booted off Zoom in a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
So, Paloma, I just wanted to say, obviously, thanks very much for coming through today. It really has been great to chat to you and to learn a little bit more about the recent announcement from Border Cave, and obviously, congratulations to you, congratulations to the Border Cave team. It really is incredible research that's going on there. Border Cave is such a significant site, not only from a Southern African point of view, but because we are answering these broader questions about early, technological developments, as a species, as we developed into modernity. So it really is super interesting. So thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll be chatting to you again sometime soon in the future.
Okay, thank you very much for the invite, and anytime to talk about Middle Stone Age. And yeah.